Henry basically did all the business stuff because at that point there was no, back in this is 86, 87, all the indie bands, there was no, you were professional about playing, and that was about it. Because you were usually fairly young and just interested in being in a band. You didn't really give a shit about the rest of it. Didn't really care that much about um, anything else because it didn't matter. Because you weren't going to be famous and you weren't going to be rich, and nobody was ever going to care, and you were just lucky to be able to do this. Because that's how it was. There was no reason not to do what you believed in 100%. Because what difference did it make? You weren't going to get anywhere with it, and you weren't even sure if you wanted to get anywhere at that point. So, the idea of having management, or the idea of having a professional agent, or the idea of, I don't know, just everything was much more seat of your pants back then. And then, I think that pretty much all changed. Well, it changed in a couple of different gear shifts, one of which was when Soundgarden got signed to A&M. That made everybody go, what? Huh? That was long before Nirvana, right? So we're like, wait, one of us got signed to a record label? A real one? That was a game changer.
Yeah.
A little bit. And then, of course, Nirvana. That changed everything. So, and I think Nirvana was a much bigger seismic change, just because all of a sudden you had a generation of people that came after that who didn't know that you weren't supposed to make it. Now, I don't mean that in a moral sense. What I mean is that, where we had the liberation, we had the luxury of not having any reason not to do exactly what we wanted.
Right.
All of a sudden, people who were playing, quote, indie music, who were worried about demographics and fan base and market share and radio outreach, and like, well, wait a minute, So I mean, that was a much bigger game changer because it changed the set of expectations for the musicians that were coming into the scene. So I think there's a big difference between like the guys from my generation, and like I don't know, what's a young band. And I'm not trying to speak ill of any, but just a younger band.
Sure.
I think their expectation of what the music scene and what the music business and music industry can mean for them is just different. Because the market's different and the business is totally different.
That brings me to a question I had about something I read on your discography on your website. You said that in the Brussels scene in 1991, it was kind of a playground where we were invisible and could do as we pleased.
Yeah, I think that's true. It was like that. New York was like that a little bit in the 70s too. Well, Brussels at that point, like all the guys from Wire were living here, the guys from Tuxedo Moon were living here. It was like a little island of expat musicians, and part of it was because Belgium was just kind of a very conservative place, and they kind of pretended you weren't there. So, it was very cheap to live. You get these huge kind of Parisian-looking apartments pretty inexpensively, and and you could have a little. It was like I guess a mini version of what Paris might have been like in the 20s or 30s, only a lot smaller. It's just that you had this little kind of cafe culture of people who you sit there, get together, and just have a little bit of scene and compare ideas and stuff, and without really participating in the culture that was going around them. In fact, the culture that was going around you just pretended you weren't there, which was fine, which was extremely convenient in a lot of ways. And yeah, New York, it's even truer with hindsight. It's even truer of New York in the 70s. I mean, New York was like being left at home, and all the grown-ups have gone. It was like, sure, we'll open a club in the Squad. Yeah, your band can play here. Sure, you want to paint the walls with blood, whatever. Nobody was watching.
Right.
So there was a certain liberation in that, which had its ups and downsides. But most of those that kind of urban environment is really hard to find. I think the last vestiges, the last versions of that I heard of were all you know, as the East was crumbling. So you'd hear like, oh yeah, Bucharest is the place to go. You can live really cheap, and there's all these venues. Well, you know, and then it just kept moving further east. Now I think it's just gone. I thought it's in Mongolia. It's harder to find a supporting environment if you're a musician, especially if you don't want to do the America's Got Talent celebrity for no reason route, right? It's very hard to find supporting environments if you're a musician or maybe some other kind of artist. It's much harder than it used to be. I mean, maybe that's because I'm older and grumpier, but maybe it also just is actually true. So I think it is harder for musicians nowadays. I feel incredibly lucky to have started when I did and gotten to do what I did in the way that I did, because I think you know, I look at the things now and you know, I've been making records 30 years. I don't know how to go about it anymore. You know, I mean, I know how to go about it, but you know, it used to be, you know, and I'm not hearkening for the, oh, the good old days when I was, you know, but what I mean is it used to be much more intelligible, a much simpler process when it was more heavily controlled, when it was much more unfair. It was actually much easier to understand.
Right.
In as much as when there were, you know, when the access to the market was controlled so heavily by major labels and the larger indie distributors, if you needed to visualize the process by which you, a musician, got access to your audience, it was, okay, I need to go into a physical place and record to a physical medium, transfer this to another physical medium, and then have it physically transported to a place where it can be physically distributed to real people who have to go to an actual location to get it.
Right.
Ain't like that anymore. Yeah. On top of which, you know, you used to, if you wanted to promote your product or yourself or your service, you did it via physical media. Okay, well, maybe you did it on radio if you had the money, and television if you had a lot more money. But print media was, people read Spin, people read Rolling Stone, people read New Musical Express, people read Melody Maker. It was a much easier, there were many fewer options, and it was much more funneled. Everybody, you know, it was like back when America only had 3 networks, and everybody had to go to a lot of the same sources. If you wanted to buy, you know, a Perry Como record, you went to Tower Records. If you wanted to buy a Sex Pistols record, you still had to go to Tower Records. You know what I mean? So, right. So in terms of visualizing how you went about what you needed to do as a musician, it was a much simpler process back in the days. Nowadays, you have the democratization of the web and a number of other delivery vehicles, I guess, as you could say. And it's much more democratic, but it's also much more chaotic. And at that point, we are competing much more. We're competing for people's attention in a much more chaotic environment. You know, the people are just overwhelmed. They're completely swamped with information, and I think the reaction has been to some degree that people have become more conservative. Well, you know, the people are buying more and more music. They're not buying more and more CDs, but they're buying more and more music. But they're buying more and more music by fewer and fewer artists. It's like Hollywood, which makes more and more money out of each movie, but each movie they release fewer and fewer movies every year. So the question is, what do you do? You know, as a musician or as an artist of any sort, how do you, you know, especially if you're adapting from the older model, how do you go about making this work? I know how to approach print media. I know how to contact radio station programmers, but what am I supposed to do, you know, with you know, online radio? Who do I contact at XFM? Or, you know, XM radio, whatever they're called. You know, it's like, God, you know. Right. So I don't know. And you know, and the other thing is it also becomes much, you can end up using so much time interacting with the media, doing your promotion, that you lose time you might otherwise be spending playing music, you know.
Sure.
It's easy to become obsessive about, about doing online work. I think it's kind of, you know, you know, the tail wags the dog quite often, I guess is the way to put it.